Hi, I'm Katie Whittemore, and I'm a translator from Spanish. And today I'm going to be reading from my translation of BAJAMAR by Aroa Moreno Durán. I translated Aroa's first novel, The Communist Daughter, for Tinder Press, and that was published in 2021. Her second novel, BAJAMAR, was published in 2022, and it quite recently won the Prix Grand Continent, and it is still seeking a publisher. So this is from the very opening page of the book. Silt. They weren't taught to swim, despite living on the estuary. It was November and the water was very cold. The water was black. Fish pricked the surface for warmth. When the child, tired of moving his arms, sank, no one could see anything anymore. Flecks of spume still burbled when the boy on the pier announced that a dog had fallen in. Then he felt badly and called for help. The town boatwoman rowed in the direction of the canal and shouted that nobody should jump. Nobody jump, or then there would be two bodies. And she took off her straw hat and clutched it in her hands. Nobody jumped. The fishermen on the steps down to the water didn't look up from their nets. The boats continued to receive their brushstrokes of fresh paint. Over in the new part of town, the factory spewed black smoke. A few shutters were pulled closed. A freighter stirred the estuary waters. Again and again, the boatwoman thrust her oar into the water, but she couldn't cross the canal under the bridge. The tide was very high and the water battered the structure with the rise and fall of waves. The neighbor woman pressed close and stepped to the edge, arms tightly linked. All hands rose to all mouths. The women set off through the streets in search of sons and daughters, in search of relief. Children's names rang through the town. Eventually, the women fell silent. Eventually, they went home. The big boy's mother grabbed him by the elbow and dragged him down the street. She didn't look at him, just her index finger and thumb digging too hard into his flesh. Don't you go anywhere today, and keep quiet. Periodically, the boy glanced behind them. It seemed he could still hear the argument, the quarrel over who would get to use the hand nets. Back at home, the little boy had used scissors to cut the heads off 5 jack mackerel and tossed them into a sackcloth. Then he'd sat with his feet dangling over the village canal, swollen at high tide, its bed exposed when the water pulls out. Between the tides, there is a difference of more than 6 feet. The little boy was about to throw in the bait when the other, bigger boy appeared and told him that he, who was older, would be the one to fish. Let me, you don't know how. No, they're mine. And the smaller boy held fast to the nets. Without thinking, the big boy shoved the smaller boy, and he fell into the water. They hadn't been taught to swim. That afternoon, no one went round the canal. No one strolled along the water's edge. But for the rest of the day, the boatwoman kept an eye on the black water. No, it isn't true that she went looking for the boy, but as the tide receded, she rowed several times over the site and looked down and looked all around. The sun was already setting when a woman ran out into the street. A woman who had discovered 5 dead, headless fish on the kitchen table and a pair of open shears. The only woman who didn't find her small son that night. One woman dressed in black who rushed down the street and knelt at the bank and plunged her arms into the water up to her elbows and waved them in an attempt to clear away the darkness. And then she split in 2, and the woman was no longer that woman. And the riverbed, like a mirror, carried her scream down the length of the estuary to the mouth of the harbor, as if it were the very horn of death. The neighbors shuddered, but each inside their own home. The small boy was discovered at low tide, face down in the muck, palms spread open on the black bottom. That night, the judge went to ask the woman what should be done with the big boy. I don't care, she said, scrubbing at the still fresh fish blood. The whole house stank of rot.